Good evening and welcome. Thank you for tuning in. Our latest story tonight is in Flint, Michigan, where they have decided to switch their drinking supply system. Instead of getting their water from Detroit's water system, they're going to use their city's river. And this should save them a lot of money. However, it is a big change and we'll be investigating how successful this transition really is. Thank you for watching and have a good night. Good evening and welcome. Welcome to tonight's broadcast. Our top story tonight, the Flint water crisis, an ongoing public health disaster that started nearly a decade ago and continues to impact thousands of residents today. What began as a cost-saving decision has led to devastating consequences for the people of Flint, Michigan. And we'll be investigating the deep facts, the agencies involved, the civil liberties at stake, including the right to clean water, environmental justice, and adequate housing, and as well as the latest developments in Washington, which could impact communities across the whole nation. And now we begin with Jeremy, who has more on the origins of the crisis.
That's right. The Flint water crisis began on April 25, 2014, when the city switched its drinking water supply from Detroit's system to the Flint River in an effort to cut costs. However, this decision made by the state-appointed emergency manager, Michael Brown, led to dangerous levels of lead contamination in the water supply. While Brown initiated the change, many hold Governor Rick Schneider and his administration responsible for allowing the crisis to persist. Over 9,000 children were exposed to dangerously high levels of lead during the first 18 months of the crisis, and the problem has yet to be fully resolved. This is especially concerning given that 54% of Flint's population is African American, raising serious concerns about environmental justice and systemic racism. Moreover, thousands of homes remain unlivable due to lead-contaminated plumbing, further exacerbating the city's housing crisis. Back to you.
A tragic situation indeed. And while the crisis unfolded, government agencies played a critical role as well, both in their failures and in their later efforts to fix the problem. For more on the bureaucratic response, we turn to Lance.
Agencies at the federal, state, and local levels were involved, but the responses varied greatly. The EPA came under fire for its slow response, waiting nearly 2 years before declaring a state of emergency in January 2016. Since then, the EPA has tightened restrictions on lead and copper levels in drinking water. However, this is not just a federal issue. The Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, or the MDEQ, has failed to enforce two key provisions in the lead and copper rule, which could have prevented this entire contamination. As a result of the Flint crisis, bureaucracies have been required to increase transparency in publishing water safety test results more frequently. They've been also pushed to improve communication protocols and engaged more directly with the communities when making infrastructure decisions. With these reforms, challenges still remain, particularly those in low-income housing areas, where contaminated water pipes still remain as a significant issue. Many Flint residents still lack safe, livable housing conditions, demonstrating the intersection between water safety and the right to adequate housing. Thank you. Back to you.
Those challenges are particularly evident in how the civil liberties were impacted. Clean water is a basic human right, yet for many in Flint, that right was taken away. And beyond water, the crisis has exposed the broader issue of inadequate housing in underserved communities.
Thousands suffered from irreversible health effects due to exposure to contaminated water, with some even requiring hospitalization. This crisis disproportionately affected African American households, with 76.8% of children in high-level lead level areas were African American. The lack of a timely response has been widely viewed as environmental racism, as predominantly African American communities have historically faced higher risks of water contamination and pollution. Furthermore, the housing crisis in Flint has worsened. Many residents cannot afford to replace their lead-contaminated pipes. With landlords in lower-income areas, they've been slow and unwilling to make the necessary repairs. The right to adequate housing is inseparable from the right to clean water. Without the safe plumbing and infrastructure, many families are effectively being denied both. Activists and legal experts are now pushing for stronger tenant protections and increased federal funding to replace the toxic water systems in housing developments.
With the Trump administration back in power, concerns are mounting over the future of environmental protections, public health regulations, and housing rights. Across the country, vulnerable communities are bracing for potential rollbacks that could weaken the safeguards meant to protect them. With the Trump administration back in power, many fear that protections could be weakened.
The outlook isn't promising. Environmental regulations are being rolled back, and agencies like the EPA are facing massive budget cuts. This will make it harder to monitor and enforce clean water standards efficiently. One of the biggest developments is the Supreme Court ruling in San Francisco versus EPA, which limited the EPA's ability to hold cities accountable for overall water quality. Under this decision, the EPA can only impose specific pollutant limits rather than holding cities responsible for ensuring overall water safety. Critics argue that this weakens protection for communities like Flint and increases the risk of future water crises around the country. Additionally, recent attempts to repeal provisions of the Fair Housing Act could make it even more difficult for low-income communities to access safe housing, compounding the effects of water crises like Flint's. Without intervention, these systemic issues will continue to disproportionately harm marginalized communities.
Yes, a deeply troubling situation that underscores the need for continued vigilance and advocacy. Flint may be one of the first well-known cases of water contamination, but without strong regulations, it won't be the last. Moreover, the right to safe and adequate housing remains a pressing issue, especially for communities impacted by environmental justice. That's all for tonight's broadcast. Stay informed, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay safe.